What would you do if an 82-year-old man on a rusty old Harley was stopped by police, and within minutes, 50 soldiers in Humvees showed up demanding to know who dared lay a hand on him? This isn't a movie scene. It happened on a quiet American street, where a decorated war hero, unknown to almost everyone around him, was treated like just another confused old man. What followed turned into a lesson in respect, dignity, and the dangers of judging by appearances. The afternoon sun glared down as the traffic light turned red at the edge of town. James Harris, steady as ever, pulled his old Harley to a stop beside the gas station he'd visited for years. The engine rumbled, low and powerful, echoing off storefront walls. But that familiar sound faded the moment blue and red lights flared in his rearview mirror. From the patrol car, Officer Ava Johnson stepped out, her mirrored sunglasses hiding the sharp, mocking look in her eyes. Just 28 years old and barely 3 years into the job, she already carried herself with a swagger that left no room for doubt. "Is this some kind of joke?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension as she approached the bike. One hand rested casually on her holstered weapon, the other motioning for him to shut the engine off. Harris didn't flinch. At 82, his hands were steady on the handlebars, his gaze fixed calmly on the horizon as if the flashing lights and sharp tone were nothing more than background noise. The officers exchanged quick, impatient glances. "License and registration. And step off the bike. Now." He handed over the documents without rushing, each one neatly tucked inside a weathered brown leather wallet. No shaking hands, no nervous fumbling, just quiet precision, the kind that comes from a lifetime of discipline. But to them, all they saw was an old man on a rusty motorcycle. And in that moment, they had no idea just how badly they had underestimated him. To the officers, James Harris looked like nothing more than a frail old man stubbornly clinging to a machine older than their parents. But what they couldn't see was the life carved into his discipline. For over 40 years, Harris had risen at 5 a.m. sharp, long before the sun, keeping the same routine he'd followed since his days in uniform. His modest farm, tucked 10 miles outside of town, ran on the rhythm of his discipline: feed the animals, check the fences, tend to the fields. Just yesterday, his 1978 John Deere tractor had broken down. Most men would have called for help, but Harris knew the exact part that failed. After all, decades of fixing engines had taught him to recognize every bolt and every gear like old friends. And in the corner of his rusty garage sat his true companion, a 1970 Harley-Davidson shovelhead. The paint was chipped, the chrome dulled, but the heart of that machine still beat strong. When the engine roared, it was less about noise and more about defiance. Proof that things built with strength and cared for with patience could outlast time itself. At 82, Harris rode with more control than most men in their 20s. His reflexes hadn't dulled, they had been sharpened by combat, by decades of military training, by the kind of situational awareness that never leaves a soldier. He noticed everything: the shifting of the wind, the nervous twitch of an officer's hand, the way a crowd gathers before trouble begins. But none of that mattered here. On this day, at this stoplight, the world only saw what it wanted to see: an old man on an old bike. And that cruel irony was about to spiral into something no one expected. Officer Johnson studied the license, her brows tightening as she read the date. 82 years old, she scoffed. "Don't you think you're a little too old to be riding this thing?" Her partner, Officer David Lopez, walked up, smirking as he gave the Harley a once-over. "Man, this bike's older than my dad. Look at all that rust." The laughter stung, not for Harris, but for the crowd that had begun to gather. A few passers-by muttered under their breath. Some pitied him, others judged him. To most, he looked like a confused old man who didn't know when to quit. "Hands on the bike." "Feet apart," Johnson ordered sharply. The search that followed was unnecessary, and everyone knew it. Still, the officers pressed on, their tone less about law and more about pride. "Do you live around here, Mr. Harris? On that farm off Highway 340, right?" Johnson's voice carried a smug certainty. "Alone. No family?" "I've been taking care of myself for 82 years, Harris replied calmly. But Johnson wasn't finished. "Don't you think it's dangerous to ride that motorcycle at your age? You could cause an accident, hurt someone." Harris said nothing, his eyes still fixed on the horizon, his silence mistaken for weakness. Lopez leaned in to whisper, loud enough for the crowd to catch. "I think he might be half-deaf, too. Look at him, barely responding." Johnson raised her voice. "Mr. Harris. Can you even hear me? Do you understand what I'm saying?" Phones came out. The crowd's whispers grew louder. "Poor old man. Don't these cops have better things to do?" one voice said. Another replied, "Or maybe he really shouldn't be riding anymore." The split was clear, compassion on one side, judgment on the other. But Harris? He remained silent, steady, and unshaken. Because he had faced far worse confrontations in places far more dangerous. And this, 2 young officers and a growing crowd, was nothing compared to the storms he had survived before. Across the street at the gas station, Marcus Williams froze mid-motion. A rag hung from his hand, forgotten, as he watched the scene unfold. Marcus was no stranger to service. At 58, he carried the quiet weight of a Gulf War veteran. And unlike the young officers mocking Harris, Marcus knew exactly who that man was. For 15 years, Harris had been filling up at his station. Always polite. Always on time with payments. Always with a firm handshake and a kind word. He wasn't just another customer, he was part of the fabric of the community. Now, seeing him treated like a confused old man in front of strangers and cameras, Marcus felt his blood boil. This wasn't just disrespect. It was humiliation. He glanced at the patrol officers barking orders at Harris, then at the crowd, whispering and recording, feeding the fire of judgment. His jaw clenched. Enough was enough. Marcus grabbed the station phone, his voice low but urgent. "Fort Carson Base. I need to speak with an officer. This is urgent." On the other end, a duty officer answered, routine at first. But the moment Marcus gave the name, James Harris, everything changed. The tone sharpened instantly. "Did you say James Harris? Hold the line." Seconds stretched. Then a different voice came on, tight and direct. "Mr. Williams, keep eyes on the situation. Do not let anyone lay a hand on Colonel Harris. We're sending a unit right now." Marcus's heart pounded. Colonel. That word landed like thunder in his chest. Harris had never once mentioned his rank. Never spoken of glory, medals, or service. And now Marcus understood, this wasn't just an old man being harassed. This was a decorated veteran, a man who carried more history and sacrifice in his silence than anyone around him could imagine. And at that moment, help was already on the way. The tension on that street corner had reached its breaking point. Officer Johnson, frustrated by Harris's calm silence, finally snapped. "Sir, you're coming with us for a psychiatric evaluation. Get in the vehicle, now." Harris's voice was steady, quiet, almost too calm. "I'm not going." The crowd buzzed louder, cell phones raised higher. Johnson's face tightened. Backing down now would mean losing control in front of witnesses. "Then I'll have to use force," she barked. But before her threat could become action, a sound rolled across the asphalt, low, heavy, unmistakable. Engines. Not one. Not two. A dozen. Every head turned toward the bend in the road. Dust kicked up in the distance as 12 military Humvees barreled toward the scene. Their engines roared like thunder, growing louder with each passing second. They didn't stop at a polite distance. They stormed in, forming a semicircle around the patrol cars and the stunned crowd. Doors swung open in unison, and 50 soldiers poured out, boots pounding against the pavement, every movement sharp and disciplined. From the lead vehicle stepped Captain George Farrell, 55 years old, 22 years of active service etched into his presence. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the officers. His eyes locked straight onto Harris. He stopped 3 meters away and snapped to attention. His salute cut through the air like a blade. "Colonel Harris, sir." The word colonel hit the air like an explosion. The crowd gasped. The officers froze. Even the soldiers, standing tall, seemed to radiate respect. Harris gave a small nod, calm as ever, as if this moment was just another sunrise in a long life. For Officer Johnson and her partner, reality crashed down all at once. They hadn't stopped an old man. They had stopped a living legend. And the reckoning was about to begin. Captain Farrell's voice cut through the silence like steel. Who dared to stop Colonel Harris? The soldiers behind him moved as one, taking a synchronized step forward. The sound of 50 boots striking pavement sent a chill through the air. Officer Johnson's confidence cracked. "Captain, I didn't know he was military. We stopped this gentleman because..." "Gentleman?" Farrell's tone snapped like a whip. "This man served 3 tours in Vietnam, carried out intelligence operations in the Gulf and Afghanistan, and personally trained hundreds of U.S. Army officers, including myself." His words landed like hammer blows. The crowd, once divided between pity and mockery, now stood in stunned silence. Cell phones kept recording, but the tone had shifted. No longer ridicule. This was reverence. Farrell didn't stop. His voice rose, carrying the weight of every soldier behind him. "This man you mocked holds 2 bronze stars, 2 purple hearts with 4 oak leaf clusters, and a Distinguished Service Cross. He is considered a living legend in the United States Armed Forces. Soldiers from across the country came here to learn under him." He turned his gaze on Johnson, sharp enough to pierce through her mirrored glasses. "And you disrespected him. In public. On camera. For nothing more than the way he looks." Lopez stepped forward, trying to salvage the moment. "We were just doing our job." Farrell's reply was instant, his eyes cold. "Your job is to protect and serve, not humiliate and degrade. Not this man. Not any man." The crowd erupted. The whispers turned to outrage. "That's right," one shouted. "Shame on them," another added. Phones tilted, capturing every word, every glare, every soldier standing tall behind their captain. For the first time, Officer Johnson's voice trembled. She stepped closer to Harris, her arrogance gone, replaced by raw fear and regret. "Colonel Harris. I'm sorry. I didn't know." Harris studied her for a long moment, then finally spoke, his words calm, measured, but heavy with meaning. "Officer Johnson, never judge a man by what you see on the surface. You have no idea what battles he fought, or what scars he carries inside." The lesson hung in the air, not just for Johnson, not just for Lopez, but for every witness and every camera still recording. And at that moment, the tide had turned completely. The standoff ended, but the story was only beginning. Within hours, the footage spread across social media like wildfire. Millions watched as an old man, mocked and threatened, was revealed to be a decorated war hero. Comment sections exploded. Some were outraged at the officer's arrogance, demanding disciplinary action. Others were humbled, admitting they had judged Harris too quickly, just as the officers had. Hashtags trended, #RespectHarris, #HonorOurVeterans, #NeverForget. Inside the precinct, Johnson and Lopez faced immediate scrutiny. What they thought would be a routine incident had turned into a national scandal. Their supervisors demanded answers. Why hadn't they run his name? Why had they treated him with contempt instead of respect? The military made its stance clear. Captain Farrell, alongside several senior officers, formally contacted the department. Their message was blunt. Colonel Harris is a national treasure. Any disrespect toward him, or toward any veteran, will not be tolerated. The pressure was enormous. Not just from the Army, but from the public. Local news outlets replayed the footage hourly. National commentators weighed in. The image of Harris standing calmly while soldiers saluted burned itself into the country's memory. For Officer Johnson, the fallout was personal. She couldn't escape the humiliation. Strangers confronted her in public. Her inbox flooded with anger. But beneath the shame, something else began to take root: reflection. One evening, she pulled Harris's file. For the first time, she read every page. The medals. The missions. The years of service. By the time she finished, tears blurred the words. This wasn't just an old man on a street corner. This was a warrior who had sacrificed everything for people like her. For people who didn't even know his name. And for Johnson, that realization would change everything. A week later, the world had moved on to other headlines, but Officer Johnson couldn't. The shame of that day clung to her, heavier than her badge. She knew she couldn't erase what she'd done, but she could face it. So, one evening, she drove to the quiet neighborhood where Harris lived. The same man she once dismissed as unstable was now sitting on his porch, cane by his side, watching the sun slip beneath the horizon. Johnson hesitated, her uniform feeling more like a weight than armor. Finally, she stepped forward. "Colonel Harris," she began, voice low, trembling, "I came to apologize, not because of the cameras, or the backlash, but because I was wrong. I disrespected you. And I disrespected every soldier who's ever worn the uniform." Harris turned slowly, his eyes calm, unreadable. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with the faintest smile, he gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Sit." Johnson obeyed, like a rookie cadet reporting for duty. Harris's words were simple, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. "You made a mistake. But the measure of a person isn't whether they fall, it's whether they learn to stand taller after. Respect isn't given because of rank, or age, or medals. It's given because every human being has worth. Remember that, and you'll be a better officer than you were yesterday." Johnson blinked back tears. For the first time, she truly understood the man she had once mocked. This wasn't just forgiveness, it was a lesson she would carry for the rest of her life. As she left his porch, Harris's voice followed her, steady and firm, like an order from a commander to his soldier. "Honor isn't in the badge. It's in the heart. Don't forget it." The camera phones were gone. The crowd was gone. But the transformation was real. And for Officer Johnson, that night marked the true beginning of her service. Colonel William Harris reminded the world of something we often forget: you never truly know the battles someone has fought just by looking at them. Behind every scar, every wrinkle, every quiet stare, there could be a story of sacrifice, pain, and unimaginable courage. For a moment, two officers saw only an old man on a street corner. But the truth revealed a warrior, a teacher, and a legend. Their mistake became a lesson for all of us. Respect isn't about titles or appearances, it's about humanity. Because the person you overlook today may be the very one who carried the weight of your tomorrow. So the next time you see someone who seems ordinary, ask yourself, what extraordinary battles might they have already fought for you, without you ever knowing?